It's the kind of thing you would read in a thriller that you'd see on the silver screen. You know, this story of the man of many faces, a man who's left victims in his wake.
Hi everyone, Niall Paterson here from the Sky News Daily Podcast. Do hope you're well. Today we are talking about someone who has had many, many names. He called himself Arthur Knight, an orphan from Ireland, now living in Scotland. In reality, he was actually Nicholas Rossi, a registered sex offender born in Rhode Island, wanted on charges of rape back in the United States. In 2021, he was arrested in Edinburgh, where he fought and failed to prevent his extradition. Sky's former Scotland, now US correspondent James Matthews was there throughout the hearing in Edinburgh. He will soon be covering Rossi's trial in Utah, where he faces 2 separate charges of rape. And as befits a man who lied about his identity, the story that leads to the trial is itself almost the stuff of fiction. James got to meet him on a number of occasions during the trial in Scotland. I began by asking him about Rossi's early years.
Yeah, born in Rhode Island, Neil, he had a troubled childhood, was beaten by his stepfather, and was in and out of foster care and also care in a group setting, a foster group setting. He got a break, age 14. He became a page in the Rhode Island State House, right in the centre of Providence. That's where the local government is situated. And a page, that's like an assistant. He'll be in the kind of Senate area. If a politician needs something, glass of water, paperwork sorted, then they will wave to the page and they will help them out. As one representative said to me, a lot of these kids, they'll be staring at the ceiling, picking their nose. This guy, this Nicholas Alaverdian, as he was called at the time, he read up on the politics, the bills. He was tuned in to the political process and, clever.
So a smart kid, as you say, and one who went on to college, but it is there that we do have evidence of his sexual offending.
There were signs of the dark side of Nicholas Alaverdian actually before he left for college. I spoke to Brian Kugan. He was a representative in Rhode Island. And like most of the politicians, he knew the young Nicholas, liked him, admired him. He was around 14, 15 at the time, came to Brian Kugan and he said, look, I'm in trouble here. I go to these foster homes. I go into social care. And, I'm being beaten up. And sure enough, he had marks on him. The way Brian Kugan describes it, he said these marks, interestingly, were all on the front. They were all marks that could have been inflicted by Nicholas himself.
So did his complaints ultimately come to anything, these accusations of abuse within the social service system?
Yes, he sued the authorities locally and ultimately came away with a settlement of tens of thousands of dollars. So, this was a kid who was switched on and extremely capable, knowledgeable, intelligent, and indeed that was the basis for a college career. He moved to Ohio, but that's where this violence in his childhood manifested itself very much in adulthood, in a very dark and sinister way. He met online, actually MySpace, which was the chat app of its day, a woman by the name of Mary Grabinski. They met for coffee, to chat, and he asked if he could escort her to her class on that day that they met. He did so. She found herself in the basement of a building with him in a corridor on her way to class, and there he sexually assaulted her.
He keeps trying to kiss me. He's holding me up against the wall. He's putting his hands up my shirt and down my pants. And, I just want to leave. I tell him, I want to leave. And he tells me, shut up, I'm almost done.
He was convicted for that. That matter did not end with his conviction. He did everything he could to smear Mary Grabinski online. He tried to sue her for damaging his reputation, but that legal action didn't progress anywhere.
I mean, so some pretty reprehensible behaviour, and as often is the case, you do not find incidents like that occurring in a vacuum. Other allegations and indeed instances of inappropriate behaviour by Rossi.
Indeed, Neil. Yeah, he married several times. His second marriage was to a woman by the name of Catherine Heckendorn. That was in Ohio. They met via a church group, and I think that was the context of trust that encouraged her to like him, to feel endeared towards him. They married very quickly, and upon that marriage, she immediately regretted it. She found herself pretty much a prisoner in her own home. He abused her, was violent towards her, would lock her in the bathroom sometimes for 2 days at a time. And indeed, Catherine Heckendorn, she recorded some of the abuse that she suffered. It is a chilling tape of essentially her trying to fight him off.
Give me your phone. Give me your phone. Stop ignoring me! What are you doing?
I'm getting out of this negative atmosphere.
No! Stop it!
No! No! Stop!
So, James, I'm getting the impression, yeah, of course, of someone with some pretty evil tendencies on the basis of what we know has happened. But there must have been a degree of charm to this individual to find himself in multiple marriages, multiple relationships.
There was. I mean, he was and is a master manipulator. He would target women, and the pattern that we see over time is of an individual who ultimately would attack women, and he would do it by earning their trust, finding himself alone with them. That's when he would strike and attack. And, that's referenced in court cases that have taken place. Ultimately, that first attack that he committed against Mary Grabinski, that has essentially reeled in Nicholas Rossi, because at that time a DNA sample was taken in connection with that attack. Police, when they looked at that sample, they realised there was a connection to a separate rape in Utah in 2008. That's what turned their attention towards Nicholas Rossi, and that's what made them want to arrest him a second time. And of course, that's what triggered his reaction, which was to fake his own death. Around 2020, a local priest, Father Bernard Healy, who had come across Nicholas Rossi in the past, he took a call from a woman calling herself Louise, said that she was Nicholas Rossi's widow and that he had died. Could he arrange a memorial mass for him? And, being the local priest, he agreed and set about starting to arrange this mass. There was email contact with what appeared to be the widow Louise. Father Healy is in no doubt today that he was actually exchanging emails with Nicholas Rossi, a man who was faking his death. And the way the priest describes it, he was being asked for a memorial mass fit for the Queen of England, he said, with the music, the tributes, great humanitarian. There were invitations put out on Facebook. At that point, Father Healy took a call from the police to say, Father Healy, see this memorial mass? Don't arrange it, because we think Nicholas Rossi is not dead. He's very much alive and is in hiding somewhere in Europe.
So where had he ultimately ended up? Do we know that?
Well, he went to Ireland initially, Neil, and, true to form, he started an online chat, an online relationship with another woman, Michelle Menard. She was in Essex. And she tells a story of, having had good engagement, positive engagement online. And then this individual suddenly turned up at her door with large suitcases at her house in Essex, immediately demanded sex, and she couldn't get rid of him. And it just was a very traumatic experience. Ultimately, she contacted the police and changed the locks on her door to get rid of him. Subsequently, Michelle Menard would file a complaint of rape against Rossi, but the police locally haven't taken that any further. Subsequent to that, we know that he went to Bristol. He certainly ended up there because that's where he married another woman by the name of Miranda Knight. And we've seen the wedding photos. Very content. Miranda, she's all smiling, confetti flying around. The happy couple with nothing to conceal except their love for each other. Of course, there's much more to the story.
A hell of a lot more, James. So at this point, he is claiming that he is dead in order to avoid charges in the United States, incredibly serious charges. So how on earth did he end up in handcuffs then?
Well, Miranda and Nicholas Rossi, or Nicholas Brown as he called himself on the marriage certificate, they moved to Glasgow. And, you know, they were living in a tenement flat, West End. He drank in the Arlington bar. A curious sort of figure. He would wear a hat, fedora style, you know, waistcoat, and sit at the end of the bar, regaling people with tales of himself. He claimed to have been an Irish orphan, said that he was an academic, and life, I suppose, for Nicholas Rossi there felt safe, happy, comfortable, far from his criminal background and far from the investigating authorities that wanted to speak to him about rapes in Utah. Things turned for him on catching COVID. It was the height of COVID, but the difficulty for him was that investigators in the States, state police, the FBI, they were looking for him and they were on his tail and they were following his digital footprint. The FBI accessed his iCloud. There were clues that they were able to follow that led him to the front door of Nicholas and Miranda. 2 officers went to that address, and what they found there was Miranda. He wasn't at home because he was in the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital across town suffering from COVID. So what happened was the police officers went to the hospital and arrested him there.
So he's in hospital. How on earth do these nurses identify him as a suspect wanted by the FBI?
Yeah, good question, Neil. And ultimately, that came down to the medical staff in conjunction with the police, because, of course, he was in a hospital ward. He was in a coma for some of his stay, and they had eyes on the tattoos, the identifying tattoos. There is an Interpol red notice that was circulated, and that has, you know, a variety of things. It also shows his arms, distinctive tattoos on biceps and on left forearm. So basically it came down to nurses, doctors, medical staff saying, yep, I'm looking at the paperwork and I'm looking at the same tattoos. That is your man.
And what was his explanation for the fact that he possessed those tattoos?
The explanation, Neil, I have to tell you, came out in court and it was jaw-dropping. There were audible gasps when he rolled out this story. He said that I'm a man who was in a coma. I didn't have tattoos before I went into hospital. When I woke from the coma, I did. He suggested that somebody had got the kit out and put tattoos on his arms. Quite the story from quite an individual. He clearly was in a panic. What he did was to try to discharge himself from hospital at that point. So he was trapped there in hospital. The police had found him, knew where he was, and that essentially was the start of the Glasgow criminal experience for Nicholas Rossi.
Well, this is perhaps the most curious aspect of what is an incredibly curious story. This was the stage at which he pretended that he was not Nicholas Rossi.
You know, I had quite an involvement with him and indeed with his wife Miranda. I got a telephone number for her, rang it, didn't answer, but that same number rang me back immediately. And it was this breathless, it was a kind of comedy Irish accent on the other end of the phone, asking me who I was. I told him I was Sky News, James Matthews, and he seemed, you know, he was very genial. I said, look, we'd be keen to do an interview if you felt willing, able, and he said, yeah, sure. He said, I'm appearing in court the next day. And he said, the difficulty I have is it's in Edinburgh and we've hired the security firm to try to get us to the court. They've actually cancelled on us because they didn't want the publicity, the circus. So I said, well, okay, well, you're doing an interview with us. To facilitate that, I'll come to Glasgow and pick you up. So I went to Glasgow early in the morning, and there he was, this quite a dark flat, 2 dogs, Miranda fussing over him. You know, quite a quite a hefty individual. And of course, she was pushing him around in a wheelchair, also carrying behind him this oxygen tank. During that journey, Glasgow to the Edinburgh court, I got a heavy sense, the first sense of a con man with a cover story, Neil. He presented himself as somebody, very much an innocent. He told me he knew nothing about TV. What is this concept? And I thought, well, I'd been in his front room. He had a big plasma screen on his wall, for one thing. And at one stage he said to me, when we do this interview, how will you chyron me? I don't know if you know that phrase. Do you know what that phrase means? Chyron?
Do you know what? No, I don't.
Chyron, we would call it super, Aston. It's the label you put at the bottom of the screen to describe somebody. That's what the Americans call it.
James, what name was he going by then? If he's not Nicholas Rossi, then who on earth was he?
Arthur Knight. He said after his marriage it was going to be Arthur Knight Brown, but he presented himself as Arthur Knight. And that's how I addressed him. That's how he was known in these early stages. That's how he insisted on being referred to and addressed by the court. And then we arrived at Edinburgh Sheriff Court, and this reluctant participant who was shy of the media, and he wandered into this collection of media and instantly started speaking to everybody, And then I'm thinking, this is a real publicity seeker. He sees the value in the court of public opinion, getting his story out there, quite apart from the legal process and prosecutors who very much think that he is Nicholas Rossi, and they have evidence to say that he is Nicholas Rossi. Content of the interview, interesting. And again, consistent red flags throughout. There was first of all, that comedy Irish accent. He kind of dropped that in at regular intervals, only when he was reminded that he was an Irish orphan. And, paperwork. I said to him, who are your parents? Oh, I don't know. They put me up for adoption. Do you have paperwork to support that? He said, no birth certificate. And you know what? Because I was adopted, if I sought out my adoptive parents, that would be a criminal offence in Ireland, which wasn't the case. The law had actually changed. That had been the case. The law had changed. But that was a hole in his story. I said, what paperwork do you have? What single piece of paperwork do you have that would back up your claim to be Arthur Knight? He said, well, bank statements. I said, well, do you have bank statements? He says, well, doesn't everybody? And throughout there was that business of the busy eyes, that concentrated deceit from him. And it concentrated particularly when you were homing in on elements of proof that he clearly didn't have. One thing I found interesting, and actually I found this interesting through the 3 interviews that we conducted, was that now and again he would insist on injecting a thought about Nicholas Rossi, a thought for this criminal on the run. Things like, one thing people should be asking is, the DNA sample that nailed this guy. Why did it take so many years for that to come out? I think that's a question for people accusing him. So it was almost as if he was conducting the defence for the individual that he said he wasn't, but actually, the very individual who was looking me in the eye.
And James, look, there wasn't there, at one point during one of your conversations with Nicholas Rossi, an opportunity for him to reconnect with that local government representative, Representative Brian Kugan. Explain what happened there.
That's right, yeah. Remember, Neil, Brian Kugan was the man who knew him, for 21 years. He wanted to adopt the young Nicholas Rossi. We were keen to verify his identity. Who was this guy? Who would know? So we called up Brian Kugan. We showed the picture of Arthur Knight to Brian Kugan, and instantly he said, that's Nick. I can see the way he talks, the way he uses his hands, his mannerisms, his eyebrows, the eyes, just everything about him. So I said, well, I tell you what, Brian, tomorrow we'll go back to the Glasgow flat, we'll interview him, and we'll give you a call, and we'll bring the two of you together. And I was interested to see what reaction it would trigger in Arthur Knight. So we went round, sat down for the interview, and I said, well, we've got somebody who knew Nicholas Rossi, and I wonder if you recognise this man. So I got Brian Kugan on the FaceTime. On Nicholas Rossi's face, Arthur Knight was he was a man perplexed, ashen-faced, couldn't actually make eye contact, didn't want to look at the phone. He was looking at me. He said, look, I don't know who this individual is. I don't want to speak to him. Just wanted no part of it. Wanted it to go away. It was the moment when Nicholas Rossi's past quite literally caught up with him. He said to me, James, look at his scar. I can see his scar. Look at his scar just above his right eye. Nicholas Rossi famously had tattoos on his biceps and his forearms. We saw that on the Interpol red notice that had been put out for the wanted man. Brian Kugan saying to me, James, get him to show you his arms. Have a look at his biceps. Brian Kugan described the tattoos. Now, Nicholas Rossi, he had shown me his forearms, and I can only assume that the tattoos from there had been removed. I'd said to him, can you show me your biceps? He says, no, I'm exhausted. I'm too tired. I don't want to do a striptease, he said. Rossi didn't want to know. Yeah, he wasn't going to show us his tattoos, didn't take off his glasses, and just wanted it all to go away. The call came to an end, and it's fair to say he wasn't best pleased. He said, look, you have lost all trust. But I quite forcibly said to him, look, we need to make our inquiries and as far as we can, verify who you are. That's why we brought Brian Kugan into your front room. And, having been frustrated, angry with us, he very quickly turned back to being friendly and, almost as if he needed us more than we needed him. He still needed access to the public audience, which I thought was interesting.
And of course, the Scottish courts arrived at the same conclusion as Mr. Kugan and yourself.
Yeah, on the basis of photographs, the tattoos, fingerprints. The Sheriff Norman McFadgen, ruled that this was indeed Nicholas Rossi and therefore could be extradited back to the United States. But the whole court process, Neil, was a real pantomime. Something that he appeared to actually quite enjoy, the very public nature of it, the media interest. Wore a variety of outfits, arriving in his wheelchair. Yeah, I remember one time he was coming back out of a prison ambulance to get to court. And I said to him, well, is the game up for you? And he said, no, the game's afoot, which of course is a Sherlock Holmes quote. And the court certainly paid due heed to it, that for all the light-hearted nature of this, and certainly the laughs that he tried to inject into proceedings, this was a very serious, sinister and manipulative individual.
And of course, he is now back in the United States under the name of Nicholas Rossi. What of his wife Miranda, though? I mean, as I understand it, she's still here in the UK, but what's your assessment of her? I mean, was she complicit? Was she blinded to who he was?
Yeah, my honest answer, Neil, is I don't know. And until she tells her story, I'm not sure anybody will. My understanding is that they are still in touch. I asked her in an interview, are you a victim or a villain? She insisted, no, they're a happy couple, and very much stood by him throughout the whole process. But I tell you one thing that's very interesting. When he faked his death, that call to the priest, call to others as well, was from a Louise, his widow, said that he died and was making arrangements for memorial masses and so on. Well, I've heard a recording of that Louise. In fact, I think we can listen to it now.
Basically, the priest was explaining that he had done his first funeral on Monday, the first since, obviously, the lockdown. So he had Nicholas's memorial and also another memorial this week.
Right, that's Louise, the widow. Have a listen to Miranda Knight, as interviewed by us. The reporting is that somebody was trying to fake their own death. Their ashes had been buried at sea.
Yes.
Apparently, let me ask you, were you involved in that?
No. We were on our honeymoon
at that point. So not the type of thing that you would
We've actually
consider.
done... Sorry, sweetie.
No, I mean, from my point of view, we were enjoying our honeymoon. We just got married. That's what having a wonderful time on our honeymoon.
Make of that what you will.
But in terms of what you have seen in the Scottish courts, what you have heard of his behaviour over the years, I don't think any of us should expect the trial to be entirely plain sailing then.
No. And in fact, we got a sense of that, Neil, in one of the preliminary hearings. He was wheeled into a Utah court and he was asked about his identity, who he was. He sat at that table in that courtroom, called himself Arthur Knight, but then he said this: I was born Nicholas Alverdian. I became Nicholas Rossi after my mother married my stepfather. And that, was the moment. That was him putting his hands up to being the man we suspected he was all along, Nicholas Rossi. He was asked, well, why did you give yourself this pseudonym? And he said, well, because of my campaigning for better conditions, better child welfare, there are people who want to kill me. He was asked, well, who are these individuals? His answer to that was, I don't want to give a mouse cheese. There's every indication that the stories continue to be spun.
Have you ever reported on anything like this before, James?
In our business, Neil, we deal with people, don't we, who tell lies, who have an interest in hoodwinking us as journalists to try to get their choice of story out there into the public realm. I think this individual is different, and the story is different. I think because of the international nature of it, the impact it's had, the interest it has generated. It's the kind of thing you would read in a thriller that you'd see on the silver screen. This story of the man of many faces, a man who's left victims in his wake, and a man for whom, he piled on the suffering of those victims, who watched him from a distance. Victims in America, rape victims who watched him from a distance. This individual with the same eyes, the same look, the same hand gestures, the same chubby fingers as one sexual assault victim said to me. They've watched him with a degree of success try to manipulate the justice system, try to manipulate the media. A man who might have thought he was going to go the distance, but a man, with whom justice ultimately caught up.
And you'll be able to follow the trial in Utah on the television channel, the app, or head to the website skynews.com. And if you want to see more videos from the Sky News podcast team, click on this side of your screen here. If you want to see more videos from Sky News, just click over here.